The headline in the Omaha World Herald business section said it all. Warren Development drops Everline from Riverside Project. Cites permit mismanagement. As I stood at the groundbreaking ceremony watching Robert Warren ceremonially turn the first shovel of dirt, I spotted Mark Callahan hovering at the edge of the crowd. Our eyes met briefly, his confident smirk from 3 weeks ago replaced by a tightness around his mouth that couldn't mask his discomfort. Budget cuts, Granny, he'd said dismissively that Friday morning, ending my 17-year career at Everline with a 3-minute conversation. Today, I was the key consultant on Omaha's most significant development project, and he was just a spectator. Funny how life works out sometimes. The firing, 3 weeks earlier. I sat across from Mark in his spacious corner office, stunned into silence. The certificate of completion for Amy's training program was still warm in my hands. I had just finished presenting it to him, proud that I had successfully trained the young intern over the past 4 months. We're implementing budget cuts and your position has been eliminated, Mark said with a dismissive shrug, leaning back in his leather chair. Thanks for everything, Granny. Granny. The word stung like a slap. I'd turned 61 last month, hardly ancient, but in Mark's Silicon Valley-inspired vision of Everline urban design, anyone over 40 was practically fossilized. Today's your last day, he continued when I didn't respond. Human Resources has prepared your final paycheck and severance, 2 weeks' pay. 2 weeks. For 17 years of dedication. For transforming Everline from a struggling 5-person studio to one of Omaha's most promising architecture firms. For securing the preliminary approvals for their biggest project yet, the $35 million Riverside development. Budget cuts. I finally managed, my voice steadier than I felt. The same week we secured the $35 million Riverside development project. My husband Thomas's voice echoed in my memory. Never let them see you sweat, Rebecca. He had built his small construction company from nothing before his passing 5 years ago, teaching me more about professional dignity than any business school ever could. It's a strategic restructuring, Mark replied, adjusting his expensive tie. Amy will be taking over your responsibilities now that you've completed her training. Amy Parker, 24 years old. Thousands of Instagram followers. No actual experience in urban development before I'd spent 4 months teaching her everything I knew about city regulations, contractor relationships, and permit applications. What Mark didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn in his rush to replace me with a younger model, was that Amy could never replace what I brought to Everline. I see, I said, gathering my dignity around me like armor. Will there be a transition period? The Riverside project has several critical permits pending. That won't be necessary, Mark replied, already checking his phone. You've done a thorough job training Amy. She's up to speed on everything. I doubted that very much. 4 months of training couldn't replace 17 years of experience, let alone the 3 decades I'd spent in this industry before joining Everline. But arguing would accomplish nothing. Human Resources will help you clear out your desk, Mark added, standing to signal our meeting was over. We've arranged for security to escort you out by noon. Security escort? As if I might what? Steal office supplies? Sabotage files? After 17 years of loyal service, this final indignity burned worse than the firing itself. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, rising from my chair with all the poise I could muster. It took every ounce of self-control not to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his strategic restructuring. As I walked out of his office, I saw Amy waiting by the reception desk, excitement poorly concealed behind a mask of professional concern. She'd known this was coming, perhaps she'd even orchestrated it. And in that moment, as the reality of my situation sank in, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't scream. I would simply leave. What they didn't know was how ugly this would get for them. In my car, 2 hours later, I placed the small box containing my personal belongings in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat, finally allowing myself a moment to process what had happened. 17 years of dedication ended with budget cuts, Granny, and a security escort. I hadn't always worked at Everline. For most of my career, I'd been at larger firms in Omaha's development sector, but 17 years ago, when the housing market crashed and layoffs swept through the industry, Mark had recruited me specifically for my regulatory expertise. "We need someone who knows how to navigate the system," he'd said then. "Someone with established relationships at the city planning office." Thomas had encouraged me to take the position. "You'll be able to shape the company culture," he'd said over dinner the night I was considering the offer. "Besides, that young man seems to genuinely value what you bring to the table." Those relationships had been crucial to Everline's growth from a struggling five-person studio to one of Omaha's most promising architecture firms. The Riverside development was their biggest project yet, a $35 million mixed-use complex that would transform the downtown riverfront. I'd spent months securing the preliminary approvals, calling in favors from contacts I'd cultivated over decades. I hadn't minded when Mark asked me to train Amy. New blood was important in any company, and I enjoyed mentoring younger staff. For 4 months, I'd patiently explained every form, every deadline, every unwritten rule that made the difference between a stalled project and a successful one. "The trick with the zoning office is to submit on Tuesdays," I told her. "George reviews applications on Wednesdays, and he's much more lenient than the Thursday staff." Amy had nodded, taking careful notes, asking thoughtful questions. I'd been impressed by her attention to detail, her apparent eagerness to learn. I'd even defended her when other staff complained about her constant social media posting. "She's young," I'd said, "but she's working hard and learning fast." What I hadn't seen were the private meetings with Mark, the lunches they shared, the way she positioned herself as the innovative future while subtly painting me as the outdated past. I started my car but didn't immediately drive away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called my daughter, Sarah. "Mom, aren't you at work?" she answered, surprised to hear from me mid-morning. "Not anymore," I replied, my voice finally cracking. "I was fired today." "What? Why?" Sarah's shock and indignation were immediate. I explained what had happened: the sudden termination, the insulting severance, being replaced by the very intern I'd trained. "That's age discrimination. You can sue them," Sarah exclaimed. As a lawyer, her first instinct was always litigation. "Maybe," I said, signaling to exit the parking garage, "but I'm not sure a lawsuit is my first choice." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, suspicious. She knew me too well. "Nothing," I replied innocently. "I just need to think." What I needed to think about was how best to remind Everline of exactly what they'd thrown away. Evening reflection. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, still processing the abrupt end to my career at Everline. The shock had faded, replaced by a simmering anger that I rarely allowed myself to feel. I wasn't just angry about losing my job. I was furious about how it had happened. The disrespect, the callousness, being discarded like obsolete equipment after years of dedicated service. I looked around my kitchen at the small touches Thomas and I had added over the years. The hand-painted tiles from our trip to Portugal. The antique clock that had belonged to his grandmother. This house held our history, our memories. I had made my contribution to Everline with the same care and attention to detail that I'd put into building this home. I opened a folder I'd maintained meticulously for years. Digital copies of every permit, every application, every approval I'd secured for Everline's projects. I paid particular attention to the Riverside development files. What Mark and Amy didn't understand, what they hadn't bothered to learn, was that these weren't just standard forms submitted through normal channels. 3 years ago, the city of Omaha had approached me directly to help streamline their permit process for major developments. The city planning office was perpetually understaffed and overwhelmed by complex projects. George, the senior planning officer, had known me for decades and trusted my thoroughness and integrity. Together, we developed a solution. I established Smith Regulatory Consulting LLC, which would serve as an official liaison between developers and the city. The arrangement benefited everyone. The city got a reliable point person who understood both sides of the process, developers got their permits processed more efficiently, and I got additional income plus the security of having my own business on the side. Everline knew about this arrangement. In fact, it was one of the reasons they'd hired me. What they'd failed to grasp, or perhaps simply forgotten in their rush to replace me with a younger model, was that my company wasn't just a pass-through entity. It had real authority in the permitting process. For the Riverside development, all the critical permits had been filed under my LC's oversight, with my digital signature required for final approval. Without me, those permits were in limbo. I closed my laptop and sipped my tea, considering my options. I could sign off on the permits as a professional courtesy, allowing Everline to proceed without interruption. That would be the nice thing to do. Or I could remind them of exactly what they'd lost when they fired me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Don't do anything rash, Mom. Talk to a lawyer first." I smiled. My daughter really did know me too well. Consulting with Maria. The next morning, Saturday, I contacted my friend Maria Rodriguez, who happened to be an employment attorney. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. "They can't just fire you because of your age," Maria said after hearing my story. "But proving age discrimination can be tricky." "I'm not interested in a discrimination lawsuit right now," I replied. "I want to know about my obligations regarding the permits filed through my consulting company." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Ah, I see where this is going. Let me be clear, if those permits were filed through your LLC and your signature is required for finalization, you are under no obligation to provide that signature without proper compensation for your services. And if Everline assumed those services were covered under your employment with them, that would be their mistake," Maria said with a small smile, "especially if your consulting work was established as a separate business entity. Do you have documentation of the arrangement?" I nodded, thinking of the folder on my laptop. "Perfect," Maria said. "Let me draft a letter outlining your position." As I drove home from our meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since hearing Mark's dismissive budget cuts granny, I felt in control again. Monday would be interesting. Monday morning, Monday morning arrived with a flurry of missed calls and increasingly frantic text messages from Everline. I ignored them all as I calmly went about my morning routine. Breakfast, crossword puzzle, a bit of gardening in the early spring sunshine. It was the first Monday in years I hadn't spent in a fluorescent lit office, and I was determined to enjoy it. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Mark or anyone else from Everline. It was George from the city planning office. I decided to answer. "Rebecca." "Thank goodness," George said when I picked up. "We've got a situation with the Riverside permits. Everline submitted a request for final approval, but everything's filed under your LC." I told them I couldn't proceed without your digital signature. "Yes, that's correct," I replied calmly. "My company is the official liaison for that project." "They're saying you're no longer involved with the project. Something about restructuring." "My employment with Everline ended Friday," I explained, "but my consulting company's involvement with the permits is a separate matter entirely." George paused before speaking again. "I see. Well, this puts us in an awkward position. The city can't proceed without your sign-off, but Everline is insisting we bypass you. That's not possible under our agreement with the city, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No, it's not," George confirmed. "The expedited process we established requires your verification. Without it, they'd need to resubmit everything through the standard channels." "And how long would that take?" George laughed. "For a project the size of Riverside? Months at minimum. Plus, they'd lose their place in line." After finishing with George, I checked my phone to find 3 more missed calls from Mark. The latest voicemail was notably different from his earlier messages. "Rebecca, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we please discuss the Riverside permits? Call me back as soon as possible." I smiled. The panic in his voice was unmistakable. He'd finally realized what my firing actually meant for his precious project. At noon, I received an email from Maria with the draft letter she'd prepared for Everline. It was perfect, professional, firm, and crystal clear about my position. Smith Regulatory Consulting would be happy to complete the permit process for the Riverside development for a consulting fee of $75,000, approximately what I would have earned in salary over the next 9 months, plus formal credit as the regulatory compliance specialist on all project documentation. I approved the letter, and Maria sent it immediately. Mark's response came within minutes. A hastily written email demanding that I call him for an urgent discussion. I ignored it. Instead, I drove to my favorite nursery and spent the afternoon selecting plants for my garden. I was examining tomato seedlings when my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mrs. Smith? This is Robert Warren. I nearly dropped my phone. Robert Warren was the principal investor in the Riverside development, a prominent businessman with deep pockets and a reputation for not tolerating delays. Yes, Mr. Warren. What can I do for you? I understand there's an issue with the permits for Riverside, he said, his tone direct but not unfriendly. Mark Callahan seems to be having trouble explaining the situation clearly. I'd like to meet with you directly to understand what's happening. I agreed to meet him the following morning at his downtown office. When I returned home, I found an email from Amy Parker in my inbox. The subject line read, "Please help." The message itself was both pleading and condescending. Rebecca, I know you must be upset about the restructuring, but holding up the Riverside project is only hurting your professional reputation. Please be reasonable and sign off on the permits. I'd be happy to include your name in the acknowledgments. Acknowledgments? After being fired and replaced? She thought I'd settle for a mention in the acknowledgments? I deleted the email without responding and went back to planning my garden. Tomorrow's meeting with Robert Warren would be interesting indeed. Meeting with Robert Warren. Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Robert Warren, choosing an elegant navy suit I'd rarely worn to the casual Everline office. Thomas had bought it for me for our 30th anniversary, insisting I needed something that reflected my professional stature. You're not dressing for them, he'd said. You're dressing for yourself and the clients who respect you. I arrived at Warren Development's sleek downtown headquarters 15 minutes early and was immediately escorted to a spacious conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the very riverfront the Riverside project was meant to transform. Robert Warren entered precisely on time, a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for blunt speaking. He shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Smith, thank you for coming. Coffee? I accepted, and as his assistant served us, Warren got straight to the point. I've invested $12 million in the Riverside development so far, he said. Now I learned that the entire project is stalled because Everline fired the one person who could navigate the permit process. I'm not pleased. I understand your frustration, Mr. Warren. Call me Robert, he said, leaning forward. I've been looking into this situation. It seems your firing wasn't just unexpected. It was exceptionally poorly timed and possibly illegal. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Tell me about these permits, Robert continued. Mark claims it's a simple paperwork issue that you're dragging out because you're bitter about being let go. I opened my laptop and showed Robert the digital trail of the Riverside permits, the initial applications, the preliminary approvals, the pending final clearances, all filed through Smith Regulatory Consulting. 3 years ago, the City of Omaha asked me to establish this arrangement to streamline the approval process for major developments, I explained. Everline knew this. It's why they hired me, but apparently they forgot that my consulting company is legally separate from my employment. Robert studied the documents carefully. And without your signature on these final approvals, the project can't move forward. Everline would need to resubmit everything through standard channels, which would take months at minimum. I see. Robert sat back, his expression thoughtful. And you sent them terms for completing the process? My attorney did, yes. A consulting fee plus professional credit for my work. Reasonable terms. $75,000, about 9 months of the salary they were no longer willing to pay you, plus recognition as the regulatory compliance specialist on project documentation. Robert nodded slowly. And their response? Demands that I call Mark for an urgent discussion. Nothing addressing the actual terms. Typical, Robert muttered. He tapped his fingers on the table for a moment, then made a decision. Mrs. Smith, Rebecca, I'd like to make you an offer that bypasses Everline entirely. This was unexpected. I'm listening. Warren Development would retain Smith Regulatory Consulting directly for the duration of the Riverside project. Same fee you proposed to Everline, plus a bonus structure tied to meeting key regulatory milestones. You'd work directly with my team, not through Everline. I tried to keep my expression neutral despite my surprise. And Everline's role? That's between me and them, Robert said with a cold smile. but I'm reconsidering our entire relationship given how they've mismanaged this situation. As he spoke, I noticed a framed photo on the credenza behind him, a younger Robert in work clothes standing beside what appeared to be his father at a construction site. I started in construction, Robert said, following my gaze to the photo. My father taught me everything I know about the business. He worked until he was 75, sharpest mind on any job site. When people talk about fresh perspectives and new blood, I remind them that wisdom doesn't have an expiration date. I left the meeting with a handshake agreement and instructions to have Maria review the formal contract that would arrive that afternoon. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Emergency meeting about Riverside today at 3 p.m. Your presence requested. We'll pay consultation fee too. Too late, I thought. Much too late. When I arrived home, I found an elaborate flower arrangement on my porch with a card from Amy. So sorry about the misunderstanding. Please call Mark ASAP. We need you. I placed the flowers on my elderly neighbor's porch instead, knowing she would enjoy them more than I would. Then I called Maria to brief her on the Warren development offer. They're offering to match the fee we proposed to Everline, plus performance bonuses, I explained. And I'd be working directly with Warren's team, not through Everline. Cutting Everline out entirely, Maria said with an appreciative whistle. That's quite a development. Did Warren indicate what this means for his relationship with Everline? He said he's reconsidering it. I got the impression that Mark has some explaining to do. I imagine he does, Maria replied. Send me the contract when it arrives. In the meantime, I suggest you continue ignoring Everline's increasingly desperate attempts to contact you. I spent the afternoon in my garden, planting the seedlings I'd purchased the day before. It was therapeutic, digging in the soil, setting young plants into place, imagining the harvest to come. A perfect metaphor for this unexpected new chapter in my professional life, planting seeds for future growth after being uprooted. The contract. Wednesday morning, news of my arrangement with Warren Development had spread through Omaha's tight-knit development community. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from former colleagues, other developers, and even journalists seeking comments. Mark's desperation reached new heights. First came an email offering an immediate consulting contract at twice the rate I'd requested. When I didn't respond, he followed up with a voicemail. Rebecca, please. We need to talk. Warren's threatening to pull Everline from the Riverside project entirely. This could ruin us. Whatever you want, name your price. You can have your old job back, with a raise. Just call me. The panic in his voice was almost satisfying enough to make up for budget cuts, Granny. Almost, but not quite. At noon, Maria called with an update. Warren's legal team sent over the contract. I've reviewed it. It's very favorable, significantly better terms than anything Everline might offer you now. How so? I asked. For starters, it's not just for Riverside. Warren wants Smith Regulatory Consulting retained for all of his development projects in Omaha for the next 2 years, with an option to renew. The fee structure would give you a comfortable six-figure income, plus those performance bonuses we discussed. And Everline's role? That's the interesting part, Maria said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The contract includes a clause stating that Warren Development reserves the right to select or reject any architectural partners for their projects. There's no guarantee that Everline will remain involved with Riverside, let alone future developments. I signed the contract that afternoon, feeling a strange mix of vindication and melancholy. I hadn't set out to destroy Everline. I'd given 17 good years to that firm, but they had made their choice when they decided I was disposable. The fallout. Thursday, the situation had evolved dramatically. I received a call from George at the city planning office. Rebecca, you won't believe what's happening. Mark Callahan has been calling every hour, trying to find a way around the permit requirements. When I explained it wasn't possible, he actually suggested that the dinosaur procedures needed to be updated for the modern era. I laughed. I assumed that went over well? About as well as you'd expect, George chuckled. The planning director reminded him that those dinosaur procedures ensure public safety and regulatory compliance. Then he asked if Everline was officially rejecting the expedited process we established with your consultancy. Mark backpedaled pretty quickly after that. Later that day, I met with Robert Warren and his project team to begin the transition. As we sat in Warren Development's sleek conference room, Robert made a surprising announcement. I've decided to terminate Everline's contract for the Riverside development, he stated matter-of-factly. Their mishandling of the permit process demonstrates a fundamental lack of professional judgment that I'm not willing to risk on a $35 million project. What about the architectural plans they've already completed? I asked, stunned by the decisiveness of his move. We've retained ownership of all plans and specifications per our contract, Robert explained. I've already reached out to Hartman and Associates to take over. They've agreed to honor the existing designs with some minor modifications. Hartman and Associates was Everline's biggest competitor in Omaha. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now, Robert continued, turning to me with a smile. Let's discuss how we get this project back on track, with your expertise leading our regulatory compliance efforts. I'm confident we can make up for lost time. As the meeting progressed, I found myself energized by the challenge ahead. At 61, I had been dismissed as irrelevant, a granny whose experience no longer had value. Now I was a key consultant on the biggest development project in Omaha, working directly with one of the city's most influential investors. Sometimes being fired is the best thing that can happen to you, especially when they have no idea what they're losing. Public recognition. The headline in Monday's Omaha World Herald business section said it all. Warren Development drops Everline from Riverside project. CITES permit mismanagement. The article detailed how the $35 million project would now proceed under new architectural leadership, with Smith Regulatory Consulting handling all regulatory compliance. There was even a quote from Robert Warren. In development, experience and relationships matter. We've brought in the best regulatory compliance specialists in Omaha to ensure this project proceeds smoothly for the benefit of the community. The best part? A small photo of me standing with the Warren Development team at the permit office, my digital signature finalizing the very approvals that had been in limbo the week before. I saved a copy of the newspaper alongside the termination notice Mark had handed me just 10 days earlier. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. From fired with a paltry 2 weeks of severance to featured in the business section as a key consultant on Omaha's most significant development project. Sarah called shortly after the article was published. "Mom, you're famous," she exclaimed. "And I just heard through the grapevine that Everline is in complete disarray." Oh, I tried to sound merely curious rather than satisfied. "Apparently they've lost 2 other clients who are concerned about their ability to navigate the permit process without you." "And Amy?" "She's been reassigned to social media strategy after she couldn't figure out how to submit a basic variance application." I couldn't help but smile at that. Social media strategy. Exactly what Amy was qualified for, not the complex regulatory work Mark had tried to foist upon her after firing me. "It's not just Riverside they've lost," Sarah continued. "Robert Warren has 5 other projects in development across the city, and word is he's taken all of them away from Everline. That's millions in contracts." "That's business," I replied simply. "No, Mom," Sarah laughed. "That's karma." "It's not karma," I corrected her gently. "It's just the natural consequence of undervaluing expertise. New beginnings." 3 months later, I stood at the Riverside groundbreaking ceremony, watching as Robert Warren and city officials ceremonially turned the first shovels of dirt on the project. My role had expanded beyond regulatory compliance. I was now effectively Warren Development's liaison with the city for all their projects, a position created specifically for my unique combination of expertise and relationships. As photographers captured the moment for local news outlets, I spotted a familiar face on the periphery of the crowd. Mark Callahan, looking decidedly less confident than when he fired me with a dismissive budget cuts granny. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, his discomfort evident. After the ceremony, a reporter from the Omaha World Herald approached me for an interview. The resulting article, "The Permit Whisperer: How Rebecca Smith Became Omaha's Most Sought-After Development Consultant," ran on the front page of the business section. It detailed my decades of experience, the respect I commanded from city officials, and the critical role regulatory compliance played in successful urban development. There was even a quote from George at the city planning office. Rebecca knows more about Omaha's zoning and permit requirements than anyone else in the industry. Developers who work with her get their projects approved in half the time. My consulting business expanded rapidly after that. I hired two assistants, experienced women in their 50s who'd been similarly pushed aside at other firms, and established an internship program specifically for people changing careers midlife. I never actively sought to damage Everline, but I watched with detached interest as their fortunes declined. Without access to my expedited permit channel, their projects faced delays. Several clients followed Warren Development's lead and took their business elsewhere. Mark's youthful approach wasn't delivering the results he promised. Amy lasted 6 more months before leaving for a marketing position at another firm. I wished her well when I heard the news. She was young. She had time to learn that flash without substance rarely succeeds in the long run. One evening, as I tended my garden, now more abundant than ever, Sarah stopped by with her children. As the kids played in the yard, she joined me among the tomato plants. Mom, I've been thinking about what happened with Everline, she said, helping me stake a plant heavy with fruit. It's like this garden in a way. How so? I asked, curious. Well, Mark thought he could just pull out an established plant and replace it with a seedling, expecting the same yield immediately. He didn't understand that what looks simple on the surface is actually supported by years of root development, adaptation to the soil, resilience built through seasons of growth. I smiled at my daughter's insight. That's exactly it. Amy wasn't a bad seedling. She just needed more time to develop before being expected to produce at my level. Their loss, the community's gain, Sarah said, gesturing to the basket of tomatoes we'd harvested. You're sharing your bounty much more widely now. As for me, at 61, I had embarked on the most rewarding phase of my career, not as someone's employee, but as the architect of my own success, building a business that valued experience, embraced wisdom, and never, ever dismissed someone as just a granny. Courtroom confrontation. Do you recognize this man, Mrs. Watson? I'm standing in a federal courtroom, my hands slightly trembling as I point toward Richard Collins. The man who 6 months ago looked at me with such disdain while sliding a manila folder across his polished desk. Yes, I say, my voice steadier than I feel. That's Richard Collins, former operations director at New Venture Technologies. The courtroom falls silent. Jurors lean forward. Richard's attorney shifts uncomfortably. Richard himself, once so confident in his tailored suits and expensive watches, now looks small, diminished. He avoids my gaze. And could you tell the court what Mr. Collins did on April 12th of this year? I take a deep breath. He fired me 3 days before my pension would fully vest. After 29 years and 362 days of service. As I speak these words, I'm transported back to that rainy Friday afternoon when my life changed forever. Not just because of what was taken from me, but because of what I chose to do about it. My name is Margaret Watson, Maggie to most, and this is how I became a whistleblower at 61 years old. Determination. How long have you been with us, Maggie? 29 years, isn't it? Richard Collins leaned back in his leather chair that Friday afternoon, his voice unnervingly casual. I remember straightening my back slightly. 29 years and 362 days, to be exact. As I spoke, I caught sight of the manila folder on his desk, and something cold settled in my stomach. In all my years at New Venture Technologies, I'd never been called into a director's office on a Friday afternoon. The April rain tapped against the window, creating a soundtrack to my rising anxiety. Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go. His eyes never met mine. Effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt. Budget constraints? The company had just announced record profits last quarter. This is your severance package. He tapped the folder with his manicured finger. Sign by tomorrow, or get nothing. HR will escort you to clean out your desk. I should have felt shocked, perhaps even the urge to plead. But instead, a strange calm washed over me. I'd spent my career examining patterns, and this one was clear as day. This wasn't random. This was calculated, precisely timed to fall before my pension vested. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, picking up the folder without opening it. Richard looked surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or protests. That would have pleased him, I think, to see me break. Men like Richard, I've learned, feed on the vulnerability of others. The drive home. The drive home felt surreal. 30 years of dedication ended with a manila folder and a cardboard box. The rain had intensified, mirroring the storm building inside me. I passed St. Mary's Cathedral where Daniel and I had married 35 years ago. I could almost see us, younger, hopeful, certain that dedication and hard work would always be rewarded. Daniel had been gone for 12 years now, but in that moment, I missed him with a fresh intensity. What would you tell me to do, Daniel? I whispered to the empty car. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for New Venture, the missed recitals during those early years, the family vacations cut short, the countless evenings spent reviewing documentation. When Laura was 15, she'd stopped asking me to attend her school events. I know you're busy, Mom, she'd say, her voice carefully neutral. It had hurt, but I told myself I was building security for our future. I pulled into my driveway and sat quietly, allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The years of commitment, the promises made by the company, the calculated timing of my dismissal. For the first time since leaving the office, I let the tears come. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, finally opening the severance package. The terms were insulting. 3 months' salary in exchange for waiving all rights to future claims against the company. No pension. No healthcare continuation. No acknowledgement of nearly 3 decades of service. Just a check and a legal trap designed to silence me. The document required my signature by 5 p.m. tomorrow. They were counting on fear and desperation to make me sign quickly, without consulting anyone. I set the papers aside and walked to my home office. Behind a row of family photo albums sat a fireproof lockbox, my insurance policy. For 4 years, I'd been bringing home copies of troubling financial documents, keeping detailed notes of conversations, and saving emails that outlined patterns of misconduct. Not because I planned to use them, but because my professional instincts told me something wasn't right. I opened the box and spread the contents across my desk. Loan applications with falsified data, quarterly reports with manipulated figures, emails instructing staff to backdate quality control certifications. Over 1,000 pages of evidence showing systematic fraud that had accelerated under Richard's direction. My fingers brushed across a memo from 2 years ago. I had flagged numerous discrepancies in the quarterly report, but Richard's predecessor had dismissively told me to focus on compliance, not accounting. 6 months later, he was promoted to the board, and Richard was brought in to streamline operations, corporate speak for cutting corners and boosting short-term gains. I picked up my phone, scrolling to a contact I hadn't called in years, Michael Freeman. He had been New Venture's chief financial officer before leaving to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd always respected my diligence, even when others found it tedious. It's time, I thought, as my finger hovered over his name. Flashback, my early years before I called Michael, I found myself staring at an old photograph on my desk. My parents standing outside their small convenience store in 1972. They'd worked 14-hour days, 7 days a week, to put me through college. Always do what's right, Margaret, my father would say. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I was the first in my family to graduate college, and when I joined New Venture Technologies in 1994, my parents had been so proud. A stable job with benefits and a pension, it represented security they had never known. I remembered my father's voice at my wedding. Daniel's a good man, Maggie. He sees your worth. Daniel had been an English teacher who believed in public service. He never made much money, but he changed lives. When he died of a heart attack 12 years ago, over 200 former students attended his funeral. After his death, I threw myself even more into my work. It was easier than facing the empty house, easier than acknowledging that Laura was grown and gone, building her own life in Chicago. The company became my anchor, my identity. I believed in what we were building, or what I thought we were building. That belief now felt like a cruel joke. The decision, Michael answered on the third ring. Maggie Watson? It's been years. How are you? 2 hours later, I had told him everything, the termination, the pension, the evidence I'd collected over 4 years. His response was measured but resolute. This isn't just wrongful termination, Maggie. Based on what you're describing, New Venture could be facing serious securities violations. The timing with your pension, that's just the tip of the iceberg. He explained the whistleblower protections available through the SEC and arranged for me to meet with his team on Monday morning. Warning: don't sign anything, he cautioned, and secure those documents somewhere safe. The decision continued after we hung up. I sat in the dark living room, questioning myself. Was I doing this for justice or for revenge? Was I betraying a company I'd served for 30 years? Or was I finally fulfilling my true professional obligation? I thought about Richard Collins. He joined the company just 6 months ago, but I'd seen his type before: ambitious, charming to superiors, dismissive of anyone he deemed expendable. At our first meeting, he checked his watch 3 times in 20 minutes. When I raised concerns about the latest cost-cutting measures, he'd interrupted. Times change, Mrs. Watson. We need people who can adapt. The subtext was clear. He saw me as outdated, a relic, not worth listening to. My phone rang. Laura's weekly call. I considered deflecting, giving a sanitized version of my week as I often did. But tonight felt different. Mom, what's going on? She asked after just a few exchanges. You sound different. I was terminated yesterday, I said simply. What? But you're just days away from your full pension. They can't do that. They did, I replied. But don't worry. I'm handling it. Do you need me to come home? I can be on a flight from Chicago tomorrow. No, sweetheart, stay put. I've got this covered. After we hung up, I realized something had shifted within me. For years, I'd tried to address these issues internally, believing in the system and the company's integrity. I'd been loyal, discreet, and professional, even when I suspected serious wrongdoing. But New Venture had made its choice, and now I would make mine. I would not be signing their agreement. I would not be silenced. And most importantly, I would not let them discard 3 decades of my life without consequence. The whistleblower laws existed for exactly this reason. Not to punish companies, but to protect the market and innocent people from fraud. People like my parents, who'd invested their small savings believing in this system's fairness. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The SEC meeting Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed carefully, placed my documentation in a secure briefcase, and drove downtown to the federal building. The weight of what I was about to do sat heavily on my shoulders, but there was also a sense of rightness to it all. The SEC offices were understated but imposing. Michael met me in the lobby, his familiar face lined with more years, but still carrying the sharp intelligence I remembered. Maggie, he said warmly, shaking my hand. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. He led me to a conference room where 2 other investigators waited: Samantha Chen, a senior enforcement attorney, and Robert Campbell, a forensic accountant. Mrs. Watson, Samantha began, before we start, I want to confirm that you understand the process we're initiating today. Once you share this information with us, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back. I nodded. I understand completely. For the next 3 hours, I walked them through my documentation, the irregular financial reporting I'd first noticed 4 years ago, the quality control certifications backdated after products had already been shipped, the pattern of revenue manipulation that had intensified after Richard's arrival. Robert examined the financial documents with growing concern. These discrepancies aren't small. The company has been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18% for the past 2 years. And you reported these issues internally? Samantha asked. Multiple times, I confirmed, showing them copies of my memos and emails. Each time, I was told the issues were being addressed or that I was misinterpreting the data. When Richard joined 6 months ago, my concerns started being rerouted to his office, where they disappeared entirely. Michael leaned forward. And you believe your termination was directly related to these reports? Without question. The timing, 3 days before my pension vested, makes it obvious. But more than that, I had recently flagged several major issues with Richard's latest cost-cutting initiative. He needed me gone before I could escalate further. As our meeting concluded, Samantha outlined the next steps. I left feeling both lighter and heavier, lighter for having finally shared the truth, heavier knowing what would come next. The company's response: I hadn't even returned home when my phone rang. It was Carol from HR, her voice trembling. Maggie, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. Richard's been locked in his office all morning, and there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our general counsel. So it had begun, faster than I anticipated. I'm not surprised, I said calmly. Did you? Carol hesitated. Maggie, did you report something? I simply did what I should have done years ago, I replied. What's happening with my pension paperwork? That's why I'm calling. The executive committee is reviewing your termination. They've put everything on hold until further notice. Within hours, the chairman of the board, James Morrison, called me directly, a man who had barely acknowledged my existence during our few previous interactions. Miss Watson, he said, his typically confident voice sounding strained. We seem to have a situation that requires your input. Would you be willing to come to the office tomorrow morning to discuss matters? I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Morrison, I replied. Any discussion should include my attorney and potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm sure you understand. The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, he cleared his throat. I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal then. As I hung up, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep weariness at the necessity of it all. I had never wanted to be a whistleblower. I had only wanted to do my job with integrity and retire with the security I'd earned. The media battle. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully broken. Local business publications ran headlines about a SEC investigation into New Venture Technologies, sending the company's stock into a tailspin. I received a formal letter from New Venture's legal department, withdrawing my termination notice and placing me on administrative leave with full benefits pending an internal review, a transparent attempt to mitigate damages, coming far too late. But Richard was fighting back. That evening, I was stunned to see an interview with him in the business section of the local paper. He claimed I had performance issues and was bitter about being passed over for promotion. He portrayed me as a disgruntled employee retaliating because of personal grievances. The accusations stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. For 3 decades, I had built my reputation on integrity and professionalism. Now, in a matter of days, Richard was attempting to destroy that. I called my attorney, Susan Kramer. Don't respond to any of it, she advised. The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow clarifying your whistleblower status and the credibility of your evidence. Let the official channels handle this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the rain again just as it had rained the day I was fired. I thought about Richard Collins, wondering what had shaped him into the man he was. During one of our few interactions, he'd mentioned growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut, the son of a hedge fund manager. My father always said business is about winning, no matter the cost, he told me once, almost proudly. I wondered if he truly believed that, or if he was simply parroting values he'd been taught without questioning them. Either way, the damage he'd done was real. The unexpected allies. What happened next caught me completely off guard. On Thursday morning, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Carol from HR standing there, looking nervous but determined. I shouldn't be here, she said quickly. But I had to come. I have something you need to see. She handed me a USB drive. It's the original performance evaluations Richard ordered us to modify after you were terminated. There are also emails where he specifically asked about the timing of your pension vesting. I invited her in, made tea, and listened as she explained how uncomfortable many employees had been with my termination and the subsequent character assassination. People respected you, Maggie, more than you know. Later that day, 2 other colleagues contacted me, offering to provide statements about the financial irregularities they'd witnessed. One of them, a junior accountant named Jason, admitted he'd been told to adjust figures by Richard directly, with the threat that team players get promoted, others get noticed for the wrong reasons. This unexpected solidarity touched me deeply. For years, I'd felt increasingly isolated at work, the aging compliance officer that younger executives sidestepped or humored. Now I was discovering that many had valued my role, even when they hadn't spoken up. The board meeting. The following week, with my attorney Susan beside me, I attended a meeting at New Venture's headquarters. The same security guard who had escorted me out on Friday now nodded respectfully as we entered. We were shown to the main boardroom, where James Morrison waited with the company's outside counsel and three other board members. Richard was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming, Miss Watson," James began, seeming to have aged years in just a few days. "We've initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns you've raised." Susan spoke before I could respond. "Let's be clear about something, Mr. Morrison. Miss Watson didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She documented and reported them repeatedly over a period of 4 years, as her job required her to do. The company's decision to ignore those reports and then to terminate her days before her pension vested speaks volumes." James shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, that's part of what we're investigating. I want to personally assure Miss Watson that her termination has been rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing with all benefits intact, including my pension?" I asked directly. "Of course," he replied quickly. "In fact, we're prepared to offer you a consulting role after your retirement, which you can begin immediately if you wish. We value your expertise." I remained mostly silent during the meeting, letting Susan handle the legal maneuvering while I observed their body language. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, yet they'd never truly seen me until now. As we prepared to leave, James made one final appeal. "Maggie, we're hoping you might consider speaking with the SEC investigators about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would be invaluable." I looked at him directly. "Mr. Morrison, I've spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 memos specifically addressing the issues now under investigation. I requested 9 meetings with executive leadership to discuss these concerns, of which only 2 were granted, and neither resulted in action. At what point in that history did I have your support?" The room fell silent. "I'll cooperate fully with both the internal investigation and the SEC," I continued. "But I'll be speaking only to the facts, as I always have. Whether those facts support or damage New Venture will depend entirely on what you do next, not what you say in this room." The reckoning. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching as Richard Collins and 2 former board members entered guilty pleas to securities fraud charges. The man who had so casually ended my career now looked diminished in his dark suit, his arrogance replaced by defeat. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave. In that moment, I saw recognition there, not of me specifically, but of what I represented, the consequences of his actions personified. The New Venture scandal had become a case study in corporate governance failures and the crucial role of internal compliance. The SEC had awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of the penalties assessed against the company. Combined with my pension and the settlement, I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, naming it after Daniel. Laura had relocated to St. Paul to be closer to me, bringing my 2 grandchildren with her. Epilogue. 1 year later, I stand at a podium in a university auditorium, looking out at faces much younger than mine. The business ethics professor had invited me to speak about my experience as a whistleblower, and the room is surprisingly full. People often ask if I regret staying at New Venture for 30 years. Given how it ended, I tell them, I don't. I regret that exposing the truth became necessary, but I don't regret my work there. Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about maintaining your principles, especially when it costs you something. After the lecture, a woman in her 50s approaches me. "I've been with my company for 22 years, she says quietly. "I've seen things. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to speak up." As I drive home, I pass St. Mary's Cathedral again, thinking of Daniel. "You'd be proud," I whisper. "It took me 61 years, but I finally understood what you and Dad were trying to teach me, that doing the right thing is its own reward." At home, my grandchildren are waiting. The 7-year-old runs to me, holding up a half-finished knit scarf, our latest project together. "Grandma, I did 3 rows all by myself. I hug her tightly, this child who will grow up knowing her grandmother not just as someone who worked hard, but as someone who stood up for what was right. And in that moment, I know with absolute certainty that all the difficult choices, all the sleepless nights, all the uncertainty, it was all worth it. Not for the settlement or the vindication, but for this, the freedom to finally be fully present in my own life without compromise. That night, as I tucked my grandchildren into bed, the younger one asked me to tell them a story. Once upon a time, I begin, there was a woman who thought her value came from what she did, not who she was. And as I continue the story, I realize I'm finally at peace, not because I won, but because I chose truth, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The family portrait crashed to the floor, glass shattering across my living room. My hand stung where David's fist had connected with my wrist. At 54, I never imagined I'd be cowering in the corner of my own home, watching my husband of 25 years transform into someone unrecognizable. You think you're so perfect, don't you, Sarah? David slurred, swaying slightly, his expensive cologne now mixed with the sharp smell of whiskey. Executive director with her fancy office and all those people who respect you. Meanwhile, I get fired after 20 years of service. 20 years. And for what? Because some young hotshot thinks my methods are outdated. I watched him through eyes that no longer held fear, only resignation. The crystal tumbler in his hand caught the light as he gestured wildly, spilling amber liquid onto the carpet we'd chosen together 15 years ago. This wasn't our first dance, but I was determined it would be our last. That's it, David, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm filing for divorce. I can't do this anymore. His face contorted with rage, the handsome features that had once made my heart race now twisted into something monstrous. The tumbler flew across the room, missing my head by inches before shattering against the wall. You're not leaving me, he growled, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides. Not after everything I've done for you. Where would you even be without me? What happened next is something I still have nightmares about, even a year later. The bruises have long faded, but the memory of his hands, once gentle in our early years, turned violent against me, remains vivid. I remember thinking, with strange clarity amid the chaos, how no one at the office would believe that David Harrison, the charming man who brought me flowers on every anniversary, could do this. When he finally passed out on our living room couch, I grabbed my phone and car keys. With trembling fingers, I texted Melissa, coming over, emergency. Please be awake. I took one last look at our home. The tasteful furnishings, the awards on the wall, the photographs of happier times, and closed the door on 25 years of my life. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Melissa's kitchen, ice on my wrist, as she called the police. You're not going back this time, she said firmly, not a question but a statement. No, I agreed, watching the ice melt against my skin. I'm not. Flashback. The early years. I met David at a charity gala when I was 29. He stood out in the crowd, tall and confident in his tailored suit, laughing with the mayor as if they were old friends. When our eyes met across the room, I felt a flutter of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Sarah Peterson, he said later that evening, appearing at my side with 2 champagne flutes. Marketing coordinator for Apex Industries. Graduate of Northwestern. Volunteers at the Literacy Center every other Saturday. He handed me a glass with a smile that reached his eyes. I did my homework. David Harrison, I counted, accepting the champagne. Senior investment analyst at Meridian Financial. Graduated Yale. Sits on the board of 3 different charities. I took a deliberate sip. I did mine too. His laugh was genuine, his interest flattering. Back then, his confidence seemed inspiring rather than intimidating. The son of a prominent banking family, he carried himself with an ease I admired. You're different from the others, he told me on our 3rd date, tracing his finger along my cheek as we sat on his balcony overlooking the city. You see me for who I really am. I thought I did. I didn't realize then that David's charm masked a profound insecurity. Growing up with a domineering father who measured love and achievements had left him perpetually striving yet feeling inadequate. His family's wealth had shielded him from consequences his entire life. Dad never thought I was good enough, he confided one night, 6 months into our relationship. We were lying in bed, the sheets tangled around us, his voice soft in the darkness. First in my class at Yale, and he asked why I hadn't applied to Harvard. Made senior analyst in 3 years, and he wondered why it wasn't two. He sighed, his breath warm against my neck. Nothing was ever enough. I held him closer that night, promising myself I would be different from his father. I would see his worth beyond his achievements. I didn't understand then how that promise would slowly erode my own sense of self. The signs were subtle at first. His irritation when my career advanced while his stagnated, the increasing frequency of his business drinks, the careful way I learned to speak around certain topics. The way his eyes would darken when I mentioned a male colleague. The tight grip on my arm when we disagreed in public. "I just worry about losing you," he'd say after each incident, his voice breaking just enough to trigger my compassion. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." By the time I recognized the pattern, we were already 20 years into our marriage, and I had become adept at making excuses for him. When friends noticed my withdrawal from social events, I blamed my busy work schedule. When I flinched at sudden movements, I pretended not to notice their concerned glances. "Marriage takes work," my mother would say during our weekly phone calls, her voice carrying the weight of her generation's expectations. "No one said it would be easy, Sarah." And so I worked harder, loved more fiercely, compromised more completely, until there was almost nothing left of the woman I had once been. At the parents' house 3 months ago, the familiar scent of potpourri assaulted me as I stepped into my childhood home. Mother had been using the same blend of dried flowers and spices for as long as I could remember, a cloying sweetness that always made me feel slightly claustrophobic. "Sarah, right on time," Mother said, kissing my cheek perfunctorily. At 78, Eleanor Peterson remained impeccably put together, her silver hair neatly styled, her clothes pressed and coordinated. She'd worked part-time at the local library for 30 years, more for the social connection than the modest income it provided. "Is something wrong?" I asked, following her into the formal dining room where the good china had been set out. "Your message seemed urgent. We'll discuss everything over dinner," she replied, her thin hands nervously adjusting the lace doilies she'd placed under the teacups. She still maintained the house with an attention to detail that had been both impressive and suffocating throughout my childhood. My father Richard sat silently at the head of the table, his 80-year-old frame smaller than I remembered, his expression unreadable behind thick glasses. He'd spent 40 years as a mid-level government employee, a man who preferred silence to confrontation. The few times I heard him raise his voice were seared into my memory precisely because of their rarity. Jennifer arrived last, looking uncomfortable, but with an undercurrent of excitement I couldn't quite place. At 50, my younger sister had never quite found her footing in life. A series of abandoned careers and failed relationships had left her living in a small apartment she could barely afford, often turning to her parents or me for financial help. "We have something to tell you," Mother said once we were all seated, the roast beef she prepared steaming on our plates. She exchanged a glance with Jennifer, who suddenly became very interested in rearranging her silverware. "Jennifer and David are engaged," Mother continued, a strange, triumphant note in her voice. The fork I'd been holding clattered against my plate. The teacup froze halfway to my lips. "What did you just say?" "It just happened, Sarah," Jennifer finally spoke, a defensive edge to her voice. "We didn't plan it. David and I ran into each other at the fundraiser for the Children's Hospital last month. We got talking, and well, one thing led to another. One thing led to—" I couldn't finish the sentence. I looked from face to face, searching for some sign this was a cruel joke. "He put me in the hospital 3 months ago. I showed you the photographs." David explained all that, Mother said dismissively, cutting her meat with precise movements. "He was under tremendous stress after losing his position at Meridian. You always did have a way of pushing his buttons, Sarah. Always so independent, so challenging. Pushing his—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The room seemed to tilt. "He's a violent alcoholic with a prescription drug problem. He emptied our joint accounts before I changed the passwords. He threw me against a wall hard enough to crack a rib. David is David." My father finally spoke, as if this explained everything. "Men like him, From families like his, they have certain expectations. Perhaps if you had been more understanding of his needs. His needs? I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. What about my need not to be beaten? What about my need for basic safety in my own home? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jennifer fidgeted with the modest diamond ring I now noticed on her finger, nowhere near the size of the one David had given me. I noted with grim satisfaction. We're just asking you to be happy for us, Jennifer finally said. Is that so much to ask from my only sister? I thought of the Miami vacation I'd planned for all of us. A peace offering after years of strained relationships, 4 tickets purchased with my recent bonus. A gesture I'd hoped would begin to repair the distance that had grown between us. In that moment, I knew I would be canceling those reservations. Yes, I said quietly, setting down my napkin and standing. Yes, it is too much to ask. I walked out without looking back, the sound of my mother calling my name fading as the door closed behind me. The crisis call, 6 weeks later. We need your help, Sarah. Mother's voice was strained over the phone. It had been 3 weeks since I'd walked out of their house, blocking their numbers. She was calling from a number I didn't recognize. A hotel phone, I would later learn. How did you get this number? I asked, standing in my office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city I would normally appreciate. My assistant had put the call through after Mother had apparently claimed it was a family emergency. Angela gave it to me, she admitted, referring to my cousin. Please don't be angry with her. I told her it was urgent. What do you want, Mother? I kept my voice professional, aware of colleagues passing by my open door. The story tumbled out. They'd gone to a budget beach resort in South Carolina, Jennifer and David's engagement celebration. The first day had been fine, checking in, enjoying the pool, having dinner. But on the second night, Jennifer had gone back to the room early with a headache while my parents and David went to the hotel bar. He said he was going to the bathroom. Mother explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. But he was gone for over an hour. Your father went to check on him and couldn't find him. We thought maybe he'd gone to check on Jennifer, so we went back to the room. Jennifer had walked in on David in bed with one of the hotel staff, a young woman who'd checked them in earlier that day. There had been a scene. David had called Jennifer names, become aggressive. He had shoved my father when he tried to intervene. He'd threatened all of us. Mother continued, her voice shaking slightly. Said we'd regret crossing him. Then he just left, packed his things, and disappeared with that woman. I'm sorry that happened, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Despite everything, I wouldn't wish that humiliation on Jennifer. But I don't understand why you're calling me. That's not all, Mother continued, her voice dropping further. The next morning, your father and I discovered charges on our credit cards. Thousands of dollars in cash withdrawals. But how could he access them? We never gave him our cards. You keep your pins written in your wallets, I said flatly, remembering my father's lifelong habit. A small notebook in his wallet where he recorded all his passwords and numbers, despite my repeated warnings about the security risk. We never thought. She trailed off. Sarah, we were wrong. We're going to file charges against him for the theft, but the credit card companies won't reimburse us until the investigation is complete. We don't even have money to get home. Jennifer is devastated. Your father is having chest pains from the stress, and I don't know what to do. A laugh escaped me, not of humor, but of bitter recognition. Let me get this straight. You disowned me, called me a liar, chose my abuser over me, and now you want me to bail you out? We're family, she said, as if those words could erase everything. No, I replied, feeling strangely calm. You made it very clear we're not family. You told me I was dead to you when I refused to attend the engagement dinner. I'm not giving you a cent. Sarah, please. Her voice cracked, a sound I'd rarely heard from my composed mother. Call Angela, I suggested, my tone professional again. I'm sure she'll help you. Goodbye, Mother. I hung up and blocked the number, then sent a quick text to my assistant asking her to hold all calls for the rest of the day. I sat at my desk, staring at the family photo I still kept in my drawer, taken at my college graduation before everything fell apart. For a moment, I felt a stab of guilt. wondering if I was being too harsh. Then I remembered my mother's dismissive tone when I showed her the bruises David had left on my ribs. I remembered my father's silence, his implicit support of a man who had hurt his daughter. I remembered Jennifer's smug expression when she announced her engagement to my abuser. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a resolve I was only beginning to cultivate, the determination to protect myself, even from the people who should have protected me. Aftermath. Building boundaries. The calls came first, from aunts, uncles, family friends. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial sympathy for my situation, followed by subtle and not so subtle pressure to be the bigger person. "I know David hurt you," Aunt Caroline said, her voice honey sweet over the phone. "But your parents are getting older. They need your help, Sarah. You've always been the stable one." "They're adults who made choices," I replied. "Just like I'm making mine." I blocked each number as the calls came in, a digital barrier rising between me and the family who had failed me. Then came the unexpected visits. My doorman called up one afternoon. "Ms. Peterson, your parents and sister are in the lobby. They're insisting on seeing you." "Please tell them I'm not available, James," I said. "And they're not to be allowed up. Ever." The most jarring was seeing my father in the lobby of my office building the following week, being escorted out by security as I returned from lunch. "Ms. Peterson, I'm so sorry about that, Ms. Mitchell, the head of building security, said as she approached me. He claimed to be making a delivery, but we recognized him from the photo you provided to the front desk. It's not your fault," I assured her, watching my father's stooped figure disappear through the revolving doors. He looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. "Would you like us to add your family members to the permanent deny list, Ms. Mitchell asked gently. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and resolution. "Yes, please. And thank you for handling this so discreetly." I did the same at my apartment building, asking the concierge to never allow my parents or sister inside. It felt extreme but necessary. They'd shown they had no boundaries, no respect for my feelings or experiences. As weeks passed, I heard through my cousin Angela what was happening with them. They'd borrowed money from relatives to pay off their credit cards. The police investigation into David's theft had gone nowhere. He disappeared completely, likely with his hotel fling, and hadn't used any traceable cards or accounts since. My parents' bank refused to cover the fraudulent withdrawals since my parents had written down their PINs, a clear violation of the bank's security policy. "Your father had a minor health scare," Angela told me during one of our calls. "High blood pressure, nothing serious, but it required medication. Your mother picked up more hours at the library to help with the medical bills." I felt a flicker of concern but pushed it aside. They had other family members, other resources. They had made their choice. "Jennifer's been having a rough time," Angela continued, her tone careful. "She's been diagnosed with depression. She moved back in with your parents after breaking her lease. Apparently she couldn't afford the rent on her own anymore." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. I didn't wish suffering on my sister, despite everything, but I wasn't ready to be there for her. "Your mother asked about you again," Angela added. "She wanted to know if you changed your number." "I haven't," I replied. "I just don't answer." Angela sighed. "They really messed up, didn't they?" "Yes," I said simply. "They did. New beginnings." 8 months later, fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves. My life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, exercise, dinner with friends, weekend outings. I'd even started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with interesting men who made me laugh. Thomas was different from the others, an architect with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that never veered into arrogance. At 58, he'd been divorced for nearly a decade, with 2 adult children he spoke of with genuine pride. "What about your family?" he asked during our third dinner together. "You've mentioned friends, but never relatives." I considered deflecting, as I usually did when the topic arose. But something about his open expression made me decide on honesty. "It's complicated," I began, and found myself telling him the entire story. David's abuse, my family's betrayal, the boundaries I'd established. When I finished, I waited for the usual reaction: discomfort, followed by platitudes about family being family. Instead, Thomas reached across the table and gently covered my hand with his. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said simply. "It took tremendous courage to protect yourself the way you have." Something tight in my chest loosened at his words. Not judgment, not pressure to reconcile, just acknowledgement of my experience. That same week, I was promoted to Senior Marketing Director, a position that came with a substantial raise and my own corner office. I celebrated by buying myself a pair of ridiculously expensive shoes I'd been eyeing for months. Before, that money would have probably gone to helping my parents replace their ancient water heater or bailing Jennifer out of credit card debt. "You deserve this," Melissa told me over champagne at our favorite restaurant. "All of it. The promotion, the shoes, the handsome architect. You've earned every bit of happiness." Reflection. The question everyone asks. Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them? Melissa asked as we shared dinner a few weeks later. The same friend who'd sheltered me the night I fled from David, she'd been my rock throughout the divorce and everything that followed. I considered the question, taking a sip of my wine. 25 years ago, I would have already forgiven them, already assumed the role of family fixer. It was the pattern established in my childhood. Sarah takes care of everything. Sarah makes peace. Sarah sacrifices. Growing up as the eldest daughter in a traditional household, I'd been raised to be the responsible one, the mediator, the caretaker. My mother had been raised the same way by her mother, a generational pattern of women expected to maintain family harmony at any cost. "A good daughter puts family first," Mother would say whenever I showed signs of prioritizing my own needs. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "They didn't just make a mistake, Melissa. They saw my bruises. They heard my stories. They knew what David did to me, and they still chose him." "I've been seeing Dr. Winters for almost a year now," I continued, referring to my therapist. "She says I'm not cutting them off out of vengeance. I'm protecting myself from people who've shown they can't be trusted with my well-being." "That sounds right to me," Melissa nodded. "I just worry sometimes that you're carrying anger that's hurting you more than them." "It's not anger anymore," I realized as I said it. "Not exactly. It's caution. Self-preservation." As I walked home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, I'd carried the weight of my family's needs, their expectations, their problems. Now that weight was gone. I was responsible only for myself, answerable only to myself. The newfound freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. Without the familiar patterns of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing, who was I? What did I want from the second half of my life? These were questions I was only beginning to explore. The letter, an opening. The envelope arrived yesterday, a Friday afternoon. The letter carrier had slipped it in with my usual mail, bills, advertisements, a magazine I subscribed to but rarely had time to read. My mother's neat, teacher-like handwriting was instantly recognizable on the cream-colored envelope. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Sitting at my kitchen counter, I carefully sliced the envelope open with a knife. "Dear Sarah," it began. "I don't know if you'll read this, but I had to try one more time." The letter was long, 4 pages of my mother's handwriting, front and back. She wrote about how wrong they'd been, how blind. She detailed the ways David had manipulated Jennifer, gradually isolating her from friends, filling her head with lies about me and about their relationship. "He told Jennifer you had always been jealous of her," Mother wrote. "He said you had tried to control him, that the arguments were always your fault. We believed him because it was easier than facing the truth about the man we had welcomed into our family." She described how, after he left them stranded at that hotel, they found a small bag of pills in the room, prescription painkillers and sleeping aids crushed into powder. "We should have believed you," she continued. "There's no excuse for what we did. We betrayed you in the worst possible way, and we're living with that knowledge every day. Your father can barely look at himself in the mirror. Jennifer is in therapy, trying to understand how she could have been so thoroughly deceived." She wrote about her own childhood, confirming what I had long suspected. "My mother taught me that a woman's role was to keep the family together, no matter the cost. When your father and I argued, I would hide in the bathroom and cry, then come out smiling as if nothing had happened. I taught you and Jennifer the same terrible lesson that your feelings don't matter as much as keeping the peace. The last paragraph caught me by surprise. I don't expect your forgiveness, Sarah. I'm not even asking for it. What I did, what we all did, may be unforgivable. I just want you to know that I understand now what I couldn't see then. You are the strong one, not me. You broke the cycle that I couldn't break. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for reconciliation. She just asked if someday I might be willing to talk. She included her new cell phone number at the bottom of the last page. I folded the letter and put it back in its envelope, then placed it in my desk drawer. Not ready to respond, not ready to decide. Epilogue. A new morning. This morning, I wake up and make coffee, the routine familiar and comforting. Sunlight streams through the kitchen windows as I check my calendar for the day's meetings. I have lunch scheduled with Melissa, a client presentation in the afternoon, and dinner with Thomas. Things with Thomas have progressed slowly, deliberately. Neither of us is in a rush. At our age, we've learned that relationships are about quality, not urgency. Last weekend, he took me to see his latest architectural project, a community center designed to bring art and music to underserved neighborhoods. Watching him explain the thought behind each element of the design, I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. As I sip my coffee on the balcony, watching the sunrise paint the sky in pinks and oranges, I feel content, though not happy exactly. There is still a sadness in me for what I've lost, or rather, for what I never really had. A family that would choose me, parents who would protect me, a sister who would believe me. But I've built a good life for myself. I have friends who support me, a career I enjoy, a home that feels safe. I've freed myself from the obligation to constantly rescue people who wouldn't do the same for me. My phone sits on the table beside me, my mother's letter tucked away in my desk inside. Will I ever call the number she left in that letter? I don't know. Not today, probably not tomorrow, maybe not for months or even years. The anger has subsided, that's progress, I suppose. But trust once broken so thoroughly isn't easily repaired. For now, I'm focusing on myself, on healing, on building relationships with people who value me, who believe me, who respect my boundaries. I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to redefine what family means, to discover what I want from the second half of my life. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have that conversation with my mother, to hear Jennifer's apology, to look my father in the eye again. But it will be on my terms, when I'm ready, and with the clear understanding that I'm no longer the family fixer, no longer the bank, no longer the one who sacrifices her own well-being to make everyone else comfortable. At 54, I've finally learned that the most important relationship I needed to repair was the one with myself.